Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ayla Beamer, and today I will be presenting on the impact of military service on divorce rates. Marriage is a beautiful part of God's creation, but sadly it has been twisted to fit human desires, which has led to a dramatic rise in divorce rates, particularly in the military. Divorce is a major problem for military families, mainly due to the extended separation periods and the high-stress nature of the job. As usual, far more goes into making such a decision, particularly emotions. In addition to this, marriages are often affected by every occupation to some degree. However, the military has one of the highest divorce rates of any occupation. To fully understand the complex nature of divorce, the real issue must be rooted out. Divorce represents the brokenness of this world, humanity's deceitful twisting of God's moral law. Matthew 19:9 clearly outlines the consequences of divorce. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. If married in the eyes of God, then it is not up to man to decide when that commitment ends. Often in the military, people will also marry for benefits, including insurance, employment preference, housing pay, and child care support. The downside to marrying into the military is that couples will most likely spend a fair amount of their marriage separated, naturally putting a strain on the relationship. In fact, according to the most recent U.S. Census, the military divorce rate is 4.8% per year, as compared to the civilian divorce rate of around 2.5% per year. Development throughout history. As divorce is complicated, the laws and history surrounding it are extensive. Divorce without reason became an option with King Henry VIII of England. When the Pope refused to grant King Henry VIII a divorce from Queen Catherine of Aragon, he decided to start his own church, the Church of England, and appointed his own pope who would grant the divorce. In America, during and after World War II, there was a rise in marriages due to post-war prosperity, resulting in a mass change on the views of marriage. This change caused marriage to be seen as a way for one to choose how their relationship is experienced. What most people would consider modern divorce did not come around until 1969, when then California Governor Ronald Reagan signed the first no-fault divorce laws in the nation. The introduction of the laws caused the divorce rate from 1960 to 1980 to more than double. And by 2010, every state had legalized no-fault divorce. Legal implications. No-fault divorce means that either spouse can petition to the court for divorce without having to provide concrete proof of misdeeds. In order to file for a fault divorce, one must have physical evidence there has been a situation calling for a divorce. Evidence includes documents such as financial records, emails, and texts, among other documentation. Any documentation is necessary. Ethics of divorce. Family is the utmost priority when considering a divorce, especially when it comes to children. In Divorce and Remarriage, Wayne Grudem cites a study that was conducted in 1971 on the long-term consequences of divorce in families, performed on 60 families over the course of 10 years. Through the study, it was concluded that sharing custody of a child may cause traumatic instability and questioning of their identity if they are constantly being forced to move between households. Custody arrangements must prioritize the best interests of the child or children in question in order to minimize psychological consequences in the future. In order for this to happen correctly, it is necessary for all parties involved to thoroughly review the terms of the decree as to avoid future conflict or legal repercussions. Global impact. In most cultures, marriage is seen as an ancient covenant that is meant to last a lifetime. However, divorce is also a major problem in many other countries. For example, in India, there are social consequences for divorce, including having to face possible disownment. Even so, as Western culture seeped in, and as individualism has been on the rise worldwide, marriage has begun to be seen as a practice that holds people back, leading to an overall relaxing of divorce laws. As most countries do not record their divorce rates, the United States has the most extensive research pertaining to this topic. Local impact. Through a survey released to active and veteran military personnel, a greater understanding of the effects of divorce on families was ascertained. The majority of divorces were concentrated around the 20-year mark, at 45%. However, nearly 54% of the divorces occurred between years 1 and 20, represented by the first chart. As for type of divorce, active duty or retirement, 90% occurred during active duty and 10% during retirement, the second chart. The third chart represents the amount that the military directly contributed to the marriage breakdown. 20% of people polled stated that the military had affected their marriage breakdown minimally. 50% stated that the military had affected the marriage moderately, with 30% in the a lot section. The last question asked the participants how the divorce had impacted their parent-child relationship. Only 7 of the 12 participants responded to this question. Of the 7 people who answered, only 1 said that the divorce had positively impacted their parent-child relationship, meaning that 84% of people who answered this question answered in the neutral to very negative range. This survey shows a disturbing trend in military marriages that must be addressed by both government and churches. Of course, as with any issue, each denomination takes a slightly different approach to the topic of marriage and divorce. Orthodoxy. In the Orthodox Christian Church, marriage is viewed as one of the sacraments, commemorated in a richly symbolic ceremony. The church will recognize and permit up to 3 marriages. Divorce is not highly viewed and is allowed only when a broken and essentially non-existent marriage justifies one, giving the right of one or both of the partners to remarry. For divorce to be officially recognized by the church, a couple must obtain an ecclesiastical divorce, which is different than a civil divorce. If they do not, the couple is no longer allowed to participate in sacraments or serve in the church. While Orthodoxy holds a stricter view on divorce than most churches, the Catholic Church's view is fairly straightforward. The Catholic Church's view on marriage is that it was instituted by God, and human law cannot change that. The Catechism goes further to explain what happens when a person decides to remarry, stating, "Divorce is a grave offense. It claims to break the contract, to which the spouses freely consented, to live with each other till death. Contracting a new union, even if it is recognized by civil law, adds to the gravity of the rupture. The remarried spouse is then in a situation of public and permanent adultery. A marriage contract cannot be dissolved unless there has been a death. However, there are a few rare cases in which a marriage is considered null or non-existent, such as when consent was never given with canonical law." While the Catholic Church holds a straightforward view on divorce, evangelicals tend to hold the least conservative view. Despite the move to integrate into modern culture, most churches still allow divorce and/or remarriage for 3 reasons: adultery/sexual immorality, abandonment by an unbeliever, or death. This, of course, leads to the question of whether or not abuse is a biblical reason, as it is not specifically stated. The question must be asked if the situation is harming one of the party. If yes, then divorce is probably biblical, provided that all other methods of reconciliation have failed. Divorce has great moral consequences to consider, with the biggest question being, if divorce is a sin, can you lose your salvation over it? Pastor Todd Cunin of Cornerstone Church stated in an interview, "No, you can't lose your salvation if you truly had it to begin with. However, if you are divorcing for a non-biblical reason, it may raise questions of one's personal walk with Christ." Teachings of Jesus. During Jesus' time on earth, the 2 main schools of Judaism, Hillel and Shammai, held completely different views on divorce. The school of Hillel was far more lax, allowing divorce for any reason, including situations in which the wife's cooking was not satisfactory. The school of Shammai held the more conservative view of the day, restricting legitimate divorce to sexual immorality only. Jesus seemed to align himself more closely with the legitimate reasons only side of the divorce. He taught that if a man divorces his wife and marries another, unless one of the party has committed an act of sexual immorality, that man has committed adultery. Of course, Jesus still cared for those who had been divorced and corrected them when necessary, such as in the story of the woman at the well. His teachings still ring true for the modern church society. The church's role. The Christian church is a community, a support system to those who are hurting. One of the best things one can do to help those going through a divorce is to pray and let them know that they have people who love and support them. Other systems a church may implement could include childcare or counseling. Kindness, gentleness, and self-control are the best when dealing with such a situation. Everyone struggles at times, and a congregation should handle interactions with care and avoid causing undue shame, allowing a church to truly be the hands and feet of Jesus. As a church, it is also necessary to examine the other side of this as well, the matter of unrepentance and discipline. Both Matthew 18 and 1 Corinthians 5 cite specific instructions for church discipline should the issue be escalated, particularly when it comes to unrepentance. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse even to listen to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or tax collector. Matthew 18, 15 through 17. It is the church's job to publicly call out the sins of its congregation, provided that private intervention has failed. The sting of public intervention is far better than eternal damnation. How Christians should respond. Divorce is going to have consequences for all involved. The miracle of Jesus' death is that if a person is truly repentant of their sin, then there is nothing that they have done that God will not forgive. But how does one prevent what would be considered a biblical reason in the first place? The main thing is to pray, as humans are not strong enough on their own to resist temptations. One of the topmost reasons for divorce, particularly in the military, is adultery or acts of lust. The Bible instructs followers to flee youthful passions, 2 Timothy 2:22, and states that each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. The desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. James 1:14 through 15. This specific sin is far more common in the military, due mainly to extended separation periods, sometimes up to a year, and the high-stress nature of the job. Extreme care must be taken in interactions within a relationship. If a person is married, every effort must be made to flee from the sexual desire for a person who is not their spouse. My life as a military child. I have had the unfortunate opportunity to experience this firsthand. Both my parents served in the military. However, my mom got out shortly before having me. 2, maybe 3 years before I started high school, I was standing at the top of the stairs. I remember listening to my parents shout at each other, and it scared me. I knew something was wrong, but it took me a bit to put the pieces together. It took some time before things escalated out of control. Several years later, I sat on the couch, too numb to breathe. My parents had just told us they were getting a divorce. I was crushed, angry, and if I'm honest, bitter. At first, it was just like my dad has gone on a long deployment, as some military families have one parent gone for about 8 months of every year, and we were no different. This nearly constant absence took a toll on my family. Around a year passed, and as I began to frequently move houses, I started to struggle knowing where I belonged. Where is home? Without God, I don't know how I would have survived, how I would still be surviving. Since that day, I have discovered a strength I had never known before, although to this day, my heart still feels like shattered glass. While this situation will always be a struggle for me, for my family, I am blessed in a way. I now have the ability to help others going through similar situations, and I am stronger for my suffering. Conclusion. When one decides to end a bond of such finality, they must be ready to accept the consequences. Every relationship will have problems, especially when a career such as the military is involved. Divorce has become a major problem, not only in the United States, but in the world as a whole. religion and culture play a huge part in global divorce rates. Jesus demonstrates how Christians should approach this issue through fleeing the sexual temptations of someone who is not your spouse. If the Christian body wishes to help and support the next generations, then the cycle of divorce must be broken, especially when it comes to the military. Military families have sacrificed everything to keep this country safe. They are the backbone of our communities and must be kept healthy. Abraham Lincoln once said, "The strength of the nation lies in the home of its people." Together, as a church community, Christians have the opportunity to love and support those going through devastating circumstances. With this in mind, people can truly be the hands and feet of Jesus to a world lost in darkness. Thank you.